It was supposed to be better once I cut him out of my life. But I feel worse now than I did then. At least then I had something to fight for. Daniel, it looks to me like you're still fighting. Consider this. If one of the ogres in World of Warcraft was conscious and you told him that you could give him some information about another character who's on the other side of the map, he would laugh at you and say that you must possess magic or godlike powers if you were able to pull that off. But for you, all it would take is to say hack the World of Warcraft servers and download some character files from that character, upload those files to the experience log of the character you're trying to talk to, the ogre. He'd feel like the information had just come from somewhere magical, but you'd know that he just had a data transfer between his consciousness and the database. Sam was ready to share his thoughts. Time Not Here by David Caldecott, that's me. Chapter 12. In the newly found peace and quiet of a home free from danger, Daniel spent much of his time reflecting on the last few months, and indeed years. He reread all of the notes he had written in his journal late at night after the wounded soldier routine, the revelations of the conspiracy evening, and his research into the nature of psychopaths. He looked for patterns in the notes, clues, answers. What troubled him most was not that he had lost so much money, or even that he had narrowly escaped a painful death by balaclava-wearing axe maniac. No, what actually kept him up at night was the realization that he had been so terribly naive. He thought that he understood people, that everyone was just trying to do the best they could, and that evil didn't really exist. That powerful people are the same as everyone else, motivated by the love of their families and sometimes willing to compromise on their values to secure their children's futures or reputations. But evil was strictly confined to the space of fiction, television shows, movies, and horror stories, but none of that was actually real. Yet, here he was, betrayed by the one man in the world that he had trusted with everything. Outwitted by someone he had assumed was less intelligent because he didn't have a science degree, fooled by a flattering fox of incalculable cunning, dressed up as a simple-minded and loyal friend. How did this happen? The question plagued him more than any other. How can I be sure that this never happens again? Without completely distrusting everyone I meet and becoming the cynical realist I've spent my whole life trying not to become. He thought back to the first night in the house when he had hallucinated Leigh's face morphing into a reptile's. He couldn't help thinking that he had somehow tapped into some sort of informational field in which data about Leigh's true character was readable. What if he could do that again? If he ever needed to? If another psychopath crosses his path someday? Finding his way to some fringe science lectures, he started putting the pieces together. Okay, so you're a physicist too, so you'll be able to tell me if this is crazy talk. Daniel was ready to share his latest theory with Sam one afternoon over coffee. Okay, I'm listening. If the universe is a simulation, a series of codes and programs, which leading mathematicians and theoretical physicists are starting to think it is, then it's not unreasonable to suspect that there is a storage system for the information contained within that simulation. Like a server that holds all of the character and story information within a simulated game like World of Warcraft, right? Okay. Sam was predictably hesitant. So in each iteration of the simulation, when the state of the system is calculated again after a certain time, like say the Planck time, all of the atoms in that simulation will have moved a little bit, and the information about where they've moved to and what changes have happened will be logged into the storage system. Daniel spotted an earwigger looking confused in the form of a young artsy student at the next table. What are you getting at? Sam was equally confused. Well, what if the reason that some people believe that they are psychic or have dreams that supposedly come true is that somehow they've managed to tap into that data storage system and obtain information about other parts of their simulated universe, either spatially or in time? Do you mean seeing the future? Or the past, or in the same time frame but on the other side of the planet, or on another planet? You're sounding dangerously close to those New Age charlatans we used to laugh about. Bear with me. I'm not talking about anything supernatural. I'm talking about a computer simulation. Consider this. If one of the ogres in World of Warcraft was conscious and you told him that you could give him some information about another character who's on the other side of the map, he would laugh at you and say that you must possess magic or godlike powers if you were able to pull that off. But for you, all it would take is to say hack the World of Warcraft servers and download some character files from that character, upload those files to the experience log of the character you're trying to talk to, the ogre. He'd feel like the information had just come from somewhere magical, but you'd know that he just had a data transfer between his consciousness and the database. Sam was ready to share his thoughts. Okay. I agree that if simulation theory is correct, and that is a big if, then what you're saying could be the case. Though I can't imagine the mechanism by which somebody could open up a data flow to this universal database. And there are so many frauds in the psychic industry, Dan. No way are they all downloading information from a database. They are just lying. Of course they are. Of course, a lot of them are. But ask yourself this, man. Why have they existed throughout all of history? Shamans, sages, soothsayers, humanity is full of people who claim to tap into that information that others can't see, can't access. If they were all lying, people would have figured it out and stopped listening to them. Maybe a few of them actually found a way to download accurate information, albeit in a rather abstract and metaphorical way. Daniel knew how crazy he was sounding to his old lab partner. What do you mean by an abstract and metaphorical way? Sam had a good balance of skepticism and curiosity, so was happy to indulge the thought experiment. More so than Daniel had predicted. Well, take the example of a future-predicting dream. The person might see a strange array of patterns and shapes that coalesce into form some kind of image of a train crash in the middle of a dream about other unrelated stuff, and then maybe the next day that person gets a funny feeling when they're about to get on their train and they decide not to, and then the train crashes and they would have been killed if they were still on the train, but that dream and that hard to pinpoint gut feeling were the best that they could do to access an information database that said there's something dangerous coming for you unless you take action and do something differently. It's like we don't understand quantum physics. No one does. But we can write down equations that turn the incomprehensible behavior of electrons into something we can use. What if the data stream was so complicated and unreadable by our puny human minds that the best we can do is get funny feelings or strange dreams or hallucinations? I get it now, Sam interrupted. This is you trying to understand your reptile hallucination. Am I right? Not just that, I didn't tell you about this, but a few times I was walking around the local supermarket, right? And I suddenly felt uneasy, like I was in danger and that Lathe was about to appear. A few seconds later, I would see Lathe walking through the supermarket doors. It was so strange. There was no way I could have seen him before he walked through those doors, yet I felt that he was coming. Look, you might have known he always goes to the shop at the same time, or maybe you saw him with your peripheral vision. It was different times of the day and there was no time I could have seen him any sooner. The doors blocked the view, but look, he didn't want to get too far off trail. Sam, I know there's a great number of possibilities for what happened there, and the ones that include magic or messages from angels or anything like that, it's extremely unlikely and can't be proved. But maybe after the hallucination I saw that first night, maybe I've somehow tuned into a data stream, one that had information about where Lathe was or where his intention was leading. However rudimentary the data was, but it was such that time and time again I would get this funny feeling just before he showed up, and then he would show up. Maybe that data stream can help me, can help protect me from psychopaths like him. He could hear how far from the standard model of physics he had strayed since all of this. Here he was talking about predicting the future and tapping into energy fields when he had no good evidence for it beyond his limited personal experience. Maybe. Sam took a drink and then stood up to return to his lab. Take care of yourself, Daniel. Daniel continued letting the ideas flow freely. One thing that was worth investigating was the role that weed had played in his discovery of Lath's true nature. He'd heard on Joe Rogan's podcast that Rogan sometimes watches TV shows while high and laughs about how bad the acting is, as if weed makes you able to see through the person's persona. Daniel had experienced this himself while watching TV when he was living in London. After a joint, he could see people pretending to be somebody they're not. It was so obvious. As if the weed increased your field of vision so that you could see the truth about the person in front of you, and therefore could notice the masks. Once he had seen Lath's fake acting, there was no going back. It didn't matter now that he wasn't high. He could still see it. He thought about his ketamine use at university. He remembered how in the weeks before his exams, he would take large amounts of the drug and go into the so-called K-hole, a state of dissociation with the body often accompanied by hallucinations, sensations of motion through space, and on more than one physical occasion, sinking into the floor where he'd have visions that were quite physics-like. He'd see atoms jiggling around in their quantum states, exchanging particles with each other and whizzing around the place. He'd see their motion instantly transposed onto a giant 3D graph, revealing their speed and mass with its curves. By the morning, his visions wouldn't make much sense and couldn't really be put into words, but he now thought that his use of the drug had contributed to why he didn't need to revise to get high marks in his exams. Maybe these ketamine visions were how he was learning the material he had ignored during the lectures themselves. Literally seeing the physics in an imaginative space rather than just copying notes about it. Yes, ketamine came at a high cost, terrible social life, poor eating habits, bad sleep, etc. But ketamine's role in his degree was undeniable. Scratch that. The role of psychoactive drugs in general was undeniable for his personal growth and perspective as a whole. If he hoped to understand who Lath was, why he fell for the lies, and how to conquer the lifetime of substance abuse and depression that had been ever present throughout, revisiting psychoactive drugs was an appealing option. Of course, they're illegal in most places. Daniel wasn't sure whether it was because of ignorance on the part of political parties or from a recognition that a population who uses psychedelic drugs is less easy to control. They tend to be more empathetic, less materialistic, and less interested in doing the 9-to-5 work needed to keep the capitalist machine churning. Alternatives for self-development included therapy, of course, but the few times Daniel had been to see a therapist, he had been flabbergasted at how little it helped. His life story included lots of twists and turns, and his ability to talk about it at length would overwhelm the therapist before they'd eventually say, "Yeah, that sounds complicated," before trying to get him antidepressants. Without months or years and potentially thousands of pounds spent on overpriced pill pushers, he couldn't see that option bringing the results he wanted. Results. His whole life had been spent looking for a quick fix. If it didn't work right away, he'd cast it off like a broken toy, then plummet into depression until he found the next hit. It was a cycle that was now repeating itself once more. In this case, the fix was a combination of watching fringe science lectures until 3 a.m., drinking large volumes of whiskey as he did. Focusing on the screen kept him from focusing on the deep regret and despair he felt at having lost his only friend. He longed for the psycho-spiritual solution talked about by the same business gurus who had inspired him to start his own business. Billionaires talking about taking LSD in their youth, online entrepreneurs using magic mushrooms to solve business challenges in once-a-year sessions, comedians eating edibles and climbing into a sensory deprivation tank to write better material. They all seemed like interesting ideas, however difficult to pull off in a war on drug society, but they all seemed like complements, not actual solutions. They were used by already healthy people to become more productive or more creative. Daniel just felt like he needed something more. As his drinking increased, his performance at work started to suffer. He was less and less engaged with customers and found it harder to strike up conversation. When customers started conversations with him, he couldn't help but analyze what they were saying and how they were saying it to check that they weren't psychopaths. It was like a switch had been flipped on to a psychopath detection system, and then turned up to full sensitivity. Anything that a colleague or so-called friend said to him that sounded remotely manipulative would be deconstructed by his tired and hungover mind, distracting him from the work at hand. Each time it happened, he grew less and less sure of reality, as if the certainty he'd felt in his worldview for years was suddenly gone. By night, he was so exhausted from all the personality deconstructing work of the daytime that alcohol was the only settler of his nerves. One day, he was so distracted, he forgot to enter someone's order through the till, leaving a table of 10 without food for over an hour and more than a little pissed off. His boss demanded that he take a few days off, unpaid, to pull himself together. Another piece of bad news that struck him like a slash to the Achilles tendon, weakening his stride and bringing him closer to full-blown alcoholism. He told himself, "I don't know if I can make it through this. I need help." "Daniel, I'm so glad you called. I'm sorry it took me so long." "Oh, don't worry about that. Everything in its right time. How are you?" "I'm okay." "Are you still dealing with the psychopath you told me about?" "No, I managed to get rid of him." "That's wonderful news. Well done indeed, well done." He hadn't planned on making this call, but something inside had pulled him with magnetic strength to pick up the phone and dial her number. "Yeah, it's great." He didn't sound convinced. "Daniel, are you free for a tea?" A few minutes later, he arrived at a small coffee lounge on the second floor of a tarot card and crystals emporium. He didn't even know this place existed. As he'd entered the main seating area, he spotted Celeste's blonde hair and bright blue eyes, as dazzling as when he'd first seen them in the Shire Horse pub a few months ago. "Daniel," she stood with a warm, huge smile and hugged him with as much love as the last time. "It's funny," Daniel said as they sat on the large brown sofa. "We've only met that one time, haven't spoken to since then, almost a year ago, and yet..." "What is it?" she asked, looking as if she already knew the answer. "I feel like you know me more than anyone else in my life." "Why is that?" "I don't know. Maybe because you were the first person I'd told about Lathe, the psychopath." "And why did you tell me first?" "Because you are so..." Daniel couldn't finish the thought. I don't even have a word for it." "I think I know what you mean. Why don't you tell me what's been going on for you?" Daniel told her everything. Lathe's dramatic stories, the rent, the ideas about reptiles and simulation databases. Quietly, she listened intently to it all. A young woman with dreadlocks occasionally interrupted the flow of Daniel's story with offers of refills. His Russian caravan tea would go cold as he spoke, be drunk in one as he took a moment of pause and then refilled again to repeat. On the last refill, the dreadlocked woman exchanged a glance with Celeste and a knowing smile. What did that mean, he wondered. "Daniel, thank you so much for sharing that with me. I'm honored that you would be so real with me here in this moment." For a moment, he forgot that she was 20 years his senior and was struck by the beauty, not just in her appearance, but in her grace. He was hoping she'd tell him something useful, something that made it all make sense. Instead, she stared into his eyes in silence until he was too uncomfortable not to start speaking again. "I'm so frustrated. It was supposed to be better once I cut him out of my life. But I feel worse now than I did then. At least then I had something to fight for." "Daniel, it looks to me like you're still fighting." He froze, puzzled. What do you mean?" She took a deep breath. "Yes, he's gone, but the damage is very real, and it's still here. It is going to take you some time to process all of this. I went through exactly the same thing when I escaped from my manipulative mother. How did you process it? Have you ever heard of ayahuasca? He'd heard about the South American brew known as ayahuasca, a mixture of 2 or more plant ingredients. The tea contains high amounts of the molecule DMT, or dimethyltryptamine. Some believe that this molecule is released by the pineal gland in humans when we die or are in the deep REM stages of sleep. When it's present in the brain, DMT causes vivid hallucinations and journeys to so-called other dimensions of consciousness. It sounded all like New Age mumbo-jumbo to him, but nonetheless, he imagined it must be a very intense experience, similar perhaps to a K-hole. Yes, I've heard of it a bit. Okay, good. So you are somewhat familiar with the use of ancient plant medicines for the purpose of healing. I guess so. I'm not about to tell you to go to the jungle and take ayahuasca, but I am going to tell you about a similar thing that I had the privilege myself to experience very recently. Okay, I'm listening. It's known by many names, but we call it Kimba. Like the kid's cartoon lion? Coincidence, but yes, Kimba is the local name for it. It's from the Central African region of Kimbala. I've never heard of that. Most people haven't. Unlike the shamans of the Amazon, the Kimbalese have yet to embrace the marketing plan. She laughed. Anyway, most entheogenic medicines, like ayahuasca, are outwardly focused, helping us to explore relationships with others, animals, and nature. Kimba is much more inwardly focused. It helps to understand yourself and to connect to your roots. Visions of childhood traumas are not uncommon, as well as reliving past lives, moments from our ancestors' lives, and communicating with the spirit world. This sounded very woo-woo, Daniel thought, but in the aftermath of his ideas about simulation theory and universal databases, he was willing to allow the possibility that a drug could allow someone to access a data stream from their childhood in a vision form, at the very least. For this reason, she continued, Kimba has been very successful at eliminating addiction patterns, simultaneously helping people like me to address the psychological traumas in their past while physically adjusting the pleasure-seeking mechanisms of the brain itself. You mean like a reset for the brain? Yes, that's how it felt for me. I was a compulsive workaholic for years as my way of coping with my mother's abuse. After Kimba, it was like I was set free, like a button was pushed in my brain that turned off my obsession with my career. I could finally rest. That sounds too good to be true. He meant it. Yes, and don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying it's a cure for addictions. It helps. It definitely helps more than anything else I tried. But you still have to do the work to clean up your life and never go back to the old ways. My life is full of traumas, he admitted after a few moments of quiet tea drinking. I know a lot about them, I think, but I still feel guilt or regret whenever I think about them. And there's probably more. Yes, it's the same for all of us. Can you tell me more about this Kimba? Of course. I often say it's like getting 10 years of therapy, but delivered in just a few days of hard work. In one vision. Vision? Daniel interrupted. Do you mean like a hallucination? Kind of, but not just visual, more like a whole body thing. He didn't know what that could possibly mean. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Please continue. I had a vision where I had a conversation with my mother when she was my age now and I was just a toddler. She told me about the challenges she was facing at work, and I instantly understood why she wasn't able to give me any attention at that point in our life. Why she lashed out at me, out of desperation at how awful her life was. That's awful to hurt a child like that. Yes, it is. But I didn't hate her for it. Not in that moment. I felt pity for her. Kimba helped me to see things from a new perspective, so that I could let go of the pain that I was carrying. Did you go to Kimbala? No, no. There are some wonderful Kimber retreats in the Netherlands. The one I go to is run by my friends, Magda and Joseph. Do you think Kimber could help me? He asked pensively. I'm going there in a month. Come with me. Let's find out. Together. Can I tell you about a pretty intense experience from my early childhood? Daniel asked Sam when he next met him for coffee. Since hearing about Kimber, he'd been thinking a lot about his early years. He had told Sam about the strange conversation with Celeste and that he was considering accepting her invitation. Please, of course. Well, when I was about 6 years old, living in Saudi Arabia as an expat, my class at school had a pet mouse that lived in a cage in the corner of the room. We had it for like 3 months, I think, and we all loved this mouse. One day, the teacher told us that it was time to set the mouse free, and so that he could live a happy life and have kids and, etc. Then she asked me if I would take him out to the edge of the school grounds and be the one to set him free. I think she asked me because I was the one who loved the mouse the most. I played with him all the time and I was always super excited to see him. Anyway, I put the mouse in a little card box and I headed for the door, right? When another boy in the class, Ethan, volunteered to go with me. The teacher okayed it and we walked together across the playground towards the fence. As we walked, Ethan started talking about how this mouse was probably going to die soon. He said that snakes would get him, or a scorpion, or that he would die a slow and painful death. Now, I'm 6, right? So I have no real understanding of death, and I can't comprehend what this kid was talking about. Sam's face was becoming discomfited. Ethan then said we should put it out of its misery and give it a quick death, to which obviously I objected, and then he picked up a heavy stone brick. Daniel took a deep breath. Then that's the last thing I remember. I have a fuzzy memory of him lifting up the stone and for a moment seeing the mouse's crushed body and bloody. But after that, and before it, is just blackness. Jeez. Sam sounded horrified. That's a very intense thing for a 6-year-old to witness. Yeah. I don't remember much more, but my mum tells me that I went silent and white as a sheet when I got home that day. I didn't speak for a few days and wasn't the same for a long time after it. She said she didn't know what had happened. All I had said was the mouse died, until I told her the full story the other day. I called her to tell her about Celeste and Kimber. What did she say when you told her? She cried. I think it helped her make sense of what happened to me. So what does this all mean? Sam asked. Well, I've been thinking a lot about why I got so scared when Laith was holding that knife, When you see movies with brave men standing up and protecting themselves, that's the total opposite of what happened to me. I froze, I shook, I felt defenseless. Do you think that you learned some kind of defense mechanism that day with Ethan, which repeated itself with Laith? Sam, again, already saw the emergent idea. Exactly. That day with Ethan was the first time I was confronted with psychopathic behavior, because that's what murdering a mouse is. When you're 6 years old, I didn't know how to cope, so I just froze up in fear. I'm thinking that this freeze response came back when confronted with Laith, when I should have been brave and, ready to fight. Makes sense, Sam agreed. But it's one thing to understand where that kind of fear comes from. It's another trying to deal with it. Listen, Daniel, Sam looked concerned. I understand your desire to do this Kimber thing. You want to understand and be ready in case Laith ever comes back into your life. There are terrible, horrifying moments where I really think he might. And that worries me too. But just be careful, okay? You don't know who these people are. Just try to be safe. I don't want you coming back a lunatic. Thank you very much for hearing me. Thank you for joining me for chapter 12 of my novel, Time Not Here. I look forward to seeing you again. Take care of yourself, take care of your family. Much love, everybody. Bye-bye.